winter solstice. Frost on the ground. The pond is frozen. A crisp winter morning. And this is day 7 of what has become the 8-day drawing. So I need to make some inroads, I think, into this composition. I'm going to start over here. Maybe have a little bit of light on the subject. Eyebrows. I often start with these sort of eyebrows. I don't know why, it's just a sort of convenient peg to start a drawing, and then quite rapidly an eye comes into view, and that gives one a sense of where one might be going with a particular character. Now this character I think is going to have horns, because why not? This is a collection of fantastical creatures and people gathered in what on day 8 might become a marketplace or a overgrown clearing in a glade. I'm not sure yet, because there's still lots of white space to fill up. So a really enjoyable day yesterday, which was spent very gloomy yesterday in terms of the weather. Sort of overcast and grey is the only word for it. But I built a nice blazing fire in the stove and just, I think, hunkered down is the word, in the studio in the afternoon. I went for a nice walk first, and then hunkered down in the studio through the afternoon and just worked on a deck of cards, because I don't actually want over this Christmas period to start any of the projects that are lined up for next year. It just doesn't feel quite the right time just yet. I want to get back to my studio in Brighton, where I have all my art materials and paper and stuff like that, and get stuck in at the beginning of January. But in the meantime, I just want to sort of play around with a few conceptual things, one of which is this card game. And I keep saying card game, and it's not a card game, it's just a pack of cards, really for looking at more than anything. But I'm having tremendous fun drawing them, and I'll quite enjoy, I think, getting them printed, and then I can maybe offer them for sale on Big Cartel, the Cycling Fish site on Big Cartel, just so that people who see them and think, oh, they look fun, can maybe buy them. It's always nice sending things out into the world, although at this stage I don't really want to go sort of down too commercial a route. I'm working with mainstream publishers for that sort of thing, so I don't need to do it myself. This is much more a little hobby almost, doing something just for the fun of it. But part of the fun is making things like card games and one-off books that I print myself, available to the small and I would say select group of people who know my work and enjoy it. So it won't be the sort of thing you'll find in your local Waterstones or your local comic shop. The sort of stuff I do is very, for myself, is small scale and personal, and nobody has asked me for any of this stuff. It's not commissioned, it's just done. My main objective when I work on these projects is to just cover the print costs, really, and anything else is a bonus. I think there's a wider issue as well, which I think, again, is what motivates me, which is I'm very interested in how artists, particularly illustrators like me, in the next sort of generation, growing up with the tools of social media and one's personal channels of communication, very similar to what we're doing now with Patreon, how you can make a living as an artist independently. And I think that is the big issue, not for old stagers like me who've sort of had their careers and done their stuff and have had a nice time in mainstream publishing. I have absolutely no complaints. But I'm doing some of this stuff really in the spirit of inquiry, just to find out what's possible, what is out there for the next generation of artists to make sort of productive careers outside the mainstream, where you have to sort of compromise on the sort of work you do. I've always been very interested in the independent comics community. I've yet to actually make a comic myself, because I'm always sort of distracted by writing and illustrating books. But that said, what I love about the independent comic community is the things that they make. The diversity, the different voices, the sheer sort of love and fandom, I suppose, that exists in that community. And I don't think necessarily anyone gets rich doing it, but many, many creators, I think, have just the most wonderful and creative time working in that sphere. I'm sure there are lots of drawbacks, and part of what I'm doing at the moment is exploring what drawbacks there is to a sort of freelance creativity in the age of social media. But one of the great benefits, I think, is a sense of community amongst makers, and the ability to produce work without, I think, what Neil Gaiman would describe as the gatekeepers. And I think you need gatekeepers in all sorts of ways. I love my editors, I love designers and publishers. They all do rather wonderful, wonderful things. But the number of times I've sat in a meeting and said, I've got this idea for this book, and someone will say, oh no, that's either been done by so-and-so, or there's no market for it, or dragons aren't in this year. You know, that sort of stuff that just kills the idea stone dead. And I just don't want to do that anymore. If I want to do a book about dragons, I just want to get on and do it. And one of the tremendous things about then posting something up on Facebook or one of the other social media sort of platforms, Instagram, Patreon, any of these things, is that after a little while you'll meet, or people will come along and see what you're doing and say, yes, we quite like that. And that'll give you an incentive, a way to connect with people who might actually like a book about dragons. And as I say this, now suddenly I want to do a book about dragons, but that might have to wait. There are so many things I want to do that I really don't have time to. But I think this period, winter solstice, days getting longer from now on, the turning of the winter, it's a good time to think and plan ahead and start to imagine future projects that often won't ever come into being, but it's always nice to think about them. I love a good to-do list, which often turn into never get done lists, but the lists themselves I think are lovely. I think a book of to-do lists would be fun, of all sorts. A sort of book of never to be fulfilled wishes. So characters keep just cropping up in the background, looking over people's shoulders. The way I suppose crowds do, you know, you see a face in a crowd, but for me the crowd is always interesting because there are so many faces that appear within a crowd. And my goodness, aren't crowds a deeply emotive thing these days? These days of pandemic and social distance. So I think this little scene is beginning to fill out quite nicely. I think I might just introduce one last figure. And I'm starting to appreciate, in a way, this rather, rambling way of talking, I suppose, because I'm doing two things at once. One is sort of trying to be coherent in some form, and the other is to sort of draw something as I go. But that said, it feels almost as if I'm talking to an invisible therapist, and I'm never quite sure what I'm going to say. And I suppose more than that, when I review what I've just drawn, I wonder, in a psychological sense, what it says about me. And I've always said that I'd allow anyone, sort of a casual acquaintance, to look through my sketchbooks as long as they weren't a trained psychiatrist, because I'm not quite sure what some of this stuff really says about me. suppose to the casual observer it says I quite enjoy drawing random things. And my phone storage is holding up reasonably well. I'm going to have to delete this video as soon as I've uploaded it to try and preserve what tiny amounts of storage I have left, but it seems to be playing ball at the moment. So this is just a extremely random bear in the background. Allowing me to just shade little bits in the background. And I think I'm now close, I suppose, to considering what that background will be, and I think that will be the subject of day 8 of this 8-day drawing. And then I'll start doing some other stuff. Who knows? That's the great pleasure each day of, certainly during this holiday period, each day of coming into the studio and just pleasing myself, just having some fun. There we have day 7. The crowd's assembled, and day 8 we will consider where they are, the context.